Well, good afternoon, everyone. And for those of you that may be coming back from fall break, or maybe having fall break this week and watching this on a recording later on, or maybe those are getting ready for fall break next week, I hope you've had some time of relaxation. I hope you've had some time to where you spent with your family and just found some time to recharge and get ready for the next leg. So it's hard to believe that we're already in October. I've been here now for a little over 3 months. I don't know how that happened, but I know that many of you are looking at your calendars and saying, how did we get this far into the school year? So again, I hope you're either enjoying fall break, or you've enjoyed, or getting ready to enjoy fall break with some time to just relax, but also time with family. But now today's webcast, we have a pretty full agenda. So if we could have the next slide, please. We have a lot of information here that deals with everything from that can impact CTE funding I want to take some time today to kind of connect our superintendents with some of the happenings with our Kentucky Board of Education and some of the things that we're doing here at the state level. When you look at our board, we do important items every single meeting, but we have some that you may be very interested in more than other times, especially as it relates to our resolution that was passed on Monday, but also to some other information as it relates to our goals and legislative priorities. We also have Dr. Brewer that'll be coming on to talk about where we are in the study phase of accountability. And then at the end, where I want to talk to you a little bit about a customer service survey. I'll give you a little bit of information that we're working on, and we're hoping to have finalized by November 1st. So then we'll of course close with some questions and answers. So a good agenda today. Looking forward to get through this with everyone, and we'll move forward if you please. Next slide. Next slide, please. I'd like to start off with talking about our 2024 Continuous Improvement Summit. There were 16 awards that were presented from the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support. The summit allowed attendees to invest in their growth as a leader, but also to offer strategies to make a difference in their students' experiences. Associate Commissioner Kelly Foster presented award winners with a $500 check. We'd like to congratulate the districts that were recognized, including Butler, Carroll, Covington, Fayette, Jefferson, McCracken, Oldham, and Warren counties. As a former building principal, I was blessed to be a part of a team that was recognized in 2014 as some continuous improvement work that was going on in our district. And I can tell you, we really valued that time and the opportunity to learn from others. So again, congratulations to these districts, to these teams for the work, and also thank you to our OCIS group for holding this summit each year. Next slide, please. Also want to congratulate our 5 Kentucky public schools that were named 2024 Blue Ribbon winners. Of course, the U.S. Department of Education has given us 5 of those. I think that there were 356. It's on the slide there. 356 schools from across the country that were recognized. So a special congratulations to Corbin Middle School in Corbin Independent, Cold Hill Elementary School in Laurel County, Lone Oak Elementary School in McCracken, Northern Elementary School in Pulaski, and Shirley Mann Elementary School in Boone County. So congratulations to our schools that were named as National Blue Ribbon schools based on their overall academic excellence. Great job. Keep up the great work. Next slide, please. Also, we had 15 educators that were recently named to our Teacher Advisory Council for 24 and 25. The council is designed to improve Kentucky's educational landscape by providing the commissioner, me, with direct input from classrooms, and wanted to congratulate Emmanuel Anama Green, Shane Baker, Scott Bratcher, Corey Burns, Evan Daly, Megan Hall, Jessica Hobson, Brooke Leffingwell, Sarah Lizer, Kristen Morgan, Casey Page, Nick Schaffner, Becky Spies, Joseph Stivers, and Wendy Young for being named to the Teacher Advisory Council for 2024 and 25. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being a part of this. And also thank you to the districts that are allowing their teachers to be a part of this. So we really appreciate it so much. Next slide, please. As commissioner, I get an opportunity to be a part of different groups and different happenings across the Commonwealth, including in the Capitol Rotunda. And recently, there were several education leaders that gathered at the Capitol Rotunda for the We Lead Computer Science, which announcement, there's $100,000 in micro grants to the chambers of commerce for their work in business and schools. As a matter of fact, there is a gentleman that teaches the class, and we're doing a virtual computer science career academy. It's created by the Kentucky General Assembly that serves students from across Kentucky. The organization plans to have 300 new students for the 25 and 26 school year. And again, we're very excited about this opportunity to give more students more opportunities when it comes to computer science. So again, we're looking forward to this work. And I believe we've started that pilot already this year. And we have several districts that are participating in that. But we're looking to expand that as time passes. So anytime we have the opportunity to give our students these type of experiences, we're all in for that. Our next slide, please. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our communications director, Jennifer Ginn, for some more updates.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. We have competitive grants from KDE, like we usually do at this time in the program. We have one this time around for you. It's the FY25 21st Century Community Learning Centers Grant. Applications due December 3rd, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Award amount is $100,000 to $150,000 with no matching funds. The program provides academic, artistic, and cultural enrichment opportunities for students who attend high poverty and low performing schools. So there also will be 2 additional grant opportunities posted for the next Superintendent's Webcast next month. So you're not going to see them today. They aren't posted yet. But there's the link, the KDE Competitive Grants webpage. Make sure you check that regularly for updates. If you have any questions, as always, you can email Jennifer Bryant. Next slide, please. We are seeking nominations for the 2025 U.S. Presidential Scholars Program. It's not a scholarship, but the scholars will be honored for their accomplishments in June 2025 in Washington, D.C. Each school can nominate 3 high school seniors, 1 male, 1 female, and 1 CTE student, either male or female. You have a link here to the criteria for the CTE student candidates. So please share this with your schools. We're encouraging people to nominate students who, while they have demonstrated outstanding scholarship, might not otherwise have been recognized by other programs. And you can see the links there. The application deadline is November 1. So we'd love to see a lot of applications get submitted. Next slide. All right, we have Dr. Beth Hargis. Are you with us?
I am. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is a reminder that the Term 1 CTE Attend Hours report is due by November the 15th. And of course, the best way to do that would be to submit it on the 15th. This report is used for the CTE supplemental funding calculation and provides the full-time equivalent enrollments, which account for 60% of that CTE allocation. So again, this report submitted November 15th will impact the fiscal year 26 funding year. This report also assists both OCTE and your local district with data validation. We will run reports for comparison to your submission and we'll be in touch if there are any discrepancies. And the report also serves as a deliverable for the first half of the CTE funding allocation, so that you should be receiving either in December or January. And of course, that will take place once all of our data has been validated. On a very positive note, if you remember, House Bill 499 did away with that mid-year adjustment, so there will be no change in your allocation. And so again, just as a reminder, it's critical that for accurate calculations and funding for the fiscal year 26 CTE allocations, that you get this in by November the 15th. So next slide, please. All right, so the requirements for the Term 1 Attend Hours include entering all of the TEDS information and running the report. The report then must be uploaded to a SharePoint site in order for us to access it. This year, we're also requiring the ATCs to submit this report along with the local districts, and detailed instructions have been sent to the CTE points of contact. And finally, again, this just cannot be stressed enough that the deadline is November the 15th, and we will be sending out multiple reminders. And any questions should be directed to our interim data manager, Amy Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hargis. We're back to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Ms. Ginn. Also, thank you, Dr. Hargis, for that. Also, just a reminder to superintendents when, and a lot of time these deadlines are so important about meeting those funding, when we're doing our funding formulas and different processes here, it's very important to hit those deadlines as we go through. And speaking of deadline, before I go into our resolution, I want to take an opportunity to thank all 171 of our districts. As far as deadlines, one of the requirements of KDE is that we supply a report on the KEPS survey on October 1st to the General Assembly. Now, as we know, the KEPS survey is not always the best data to provide when it comes to when there's absences, and when there's vacancies within the district, if they're filled, not filled, types, things of that nature. So we put out a teacher shortage survey recently, and we have all 171 districts that have replied back to that and given us information. So thank you to each one. I know many of you stayed up late last night to finish that up, but also too took the time early this morning with some guidance from KDE to finish that up. So thank you so much for that. It means a lot as a commissioner who's going to be supplying a testimony next week in front of IJCE, the Interim Joint Committee on Education. It's important that we have the best data possible, because if we go ask for funding, we want to make sure that we're providing accurate data as we move forward. So again, looking forward to that. Now, as far as the agenda, the next item that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about on Monday, the Kentucky Board of Education passed a resolution, and the focus of this resolution was to support the use of state dollars to exclusively fund the common system of public schools. Now, next slide, please. If you look at this, you should have this slide deck along the way. If you haven't, we'll make sure that you do. I think we've sent this all out to all superintendents. The full resolution can be found on our website. As a matter of fact, it is hyperlinked from this slideshow. But if you go into our website, type in resolution, you should be able to find it pretty quickly. But if not, you have the resolution here. I do want to point out a few of the statements. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I do want you to hear some of the statements that were made by our board as it relates to using state dollars exclusively for common schools. So one of the statements states, whereas the common system of public schools is designed to provide equal educational opportunities for all Kentucky children, regardless of place of residence or economic circumstances. Another of the statements has, whereas schools outside the common school system of public schools are not subject to the same accountability and transparency requirements as the common public schools in areas such as academic standards, finances, teacher qualifications, student assessment, which can lead to inconsistencies in educational quality. Another of the statements that's included is, whereas using state funds to support schools outside the common system of public schools diverts essential resources from public schools, weakening their capacity to effectively serve all students. This practice will also increase segregation based on socioeconomic status, race, and religion, thereby undermining the principles of equity and inclusivity that are fundamental to our public education system. We also close it together with the resolution itself. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Kentucky Board of Education opposes any legislation or policy that would allocate state dollars to fund schools outside the common system of public schools, and believes that the best way to ensure all students in Kentucky receive high quality education is by supporting the existing public education system. Also in our resolution, we point out that we have worked with the General Assembly in the past, and we look forward to working with the General Assembly in the future as we move forward. But we believe that it upholds our beliefs that the best way to ensure all students in Kentucky receive a high quality education is by supporting the existing public education system. Also, too, as if you'll notice, we were lobbying to the General Assembly. That's our approach. We feel like that is very, it's something we should be doing. As a matter of fact, our student, I'll mention Preston Graham as our student representative on the Kentucky Board of Education, his comment was, what would it mean if we said nothing? And he pointed out so eloquently, much better than what I'm going to do right now, as pointing out that we need to have a resolution. And we were working on this for a couple of months. But again, his statement in our board meeting was very well delivered. And if you have the opportunity, I'd recommend going back and watching that board meeting. Now, if you'll notice, we didn't tell people how to vote for Amendment 2. And so I get a lot of questions about Amendment 2 and how to approach that. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you, I've had one interview today and I've had several previously. I have reporters ask me about Amendment 2 specifically. And this is what I say. I tell them that I'm going to vote no on Amendment 2. And the reason being is I believe that the amendment itself, if passes, basically removes all guardrails. It opens up what could happen with funding. It's not clearly defined. So when I want to vote for or against an amendment on a ballot, I like to know exactly what I'm voting for. So when you look at this, there's 3 specific questions, and I could get into more that I need answered before I could vote yes or no. So right now I'm voting no, and I will vote no, is how does this impact funding? Right now, Kentucky Public Education serves 90% of the school-age students across our Commonwealth. If you have the potential to add in another 10%, that's around, let's say, I think we're over 600,000 students in our public schools. So if you add another 60,000 into the formula, and it may not add them all, but it has the potential to add another 60,000, where's that extra funding coming from? Does it take away from the existing budget? Or is it going to be more funding added in by the General Assembly? Again, those questions aren't answered in that amendment. The next one deals with accountability. As mentioned in the resolution, would private schools be held to the same accountability measures that we are? Again, that question is not answered. The third question also deals with acceptance. And when I say acceptance, it's also alluded to within our resolution. Will private schools offer or accept all students that apply? Now, I'm not going to answer that question for the private schools, but with that being said, that's a big question for me. If a student lives within your district, within the boundaries of your district, we take them and we want to take them. We want our students in our system. But would they still be denying some students to come into that private system? So for me, that clearly takes away from our common system. We want to make sure that we have the same type of opportunities for all students and make sure that we move forward with that. Now, at the end of the day, I also close with this. I am a public servant. I do have the responsibility that if this passes, how do I work with the General Assembly? And I hope they ask for our input, and I'm sure they will, of how do we make this work for all students? How do we make sure that the money is there to make sure all students get what they need? Again, I will vote no personally, but as a public servant, I do have the responsibility to, however this goes, to move forward. So with that being said, you've seen from the Kentucky Board of Education how we approach, we talk specifically about state dollars for common system of public schools. Me personally, I'm not going to go tell people how to vote, but I will tell you that I'm going to vote no. And that's how I handle this as we move forward. So I think it's very important that you see that resolution if you have the opportunity, and you're more than welcome to utilize that resolution and spread it widely throughout your district, or maybe even take parts of it and use it in some of your communications as you move forward, or even send it out to everyone as you see fit. So again, we wanted to make sure you have that resource as we move forward. It's a big vote coming up in November. So I think it's very important that we get out the information that needs to be out there. And thank you to so many of you that have already done that, and keep up the great work. But again, let's make sure we also adhere to the Attorney General's and the point that he makes is we cannot use public funds to promote or for or against Amendment 2. So that being said, please take an opportunity to click on that hyperlink and read through our resolution. I think you'll be very proud of what you see. And also, too, I hope that you're able to use that moving forward. Next slide, please. I think that we're going to turn it over to Dr. Brewer. We'll talk a lot about our Kentucky Now We Learn study phase and the data that's rolling in and where we're seeing that come from. So Dr. Brewer, if you will, please.
Thanks, Commissioner. Will you go to the next slide? So as you all know, we've provided several updates to this group about the work of the Kentucky United We Learn Council and their moonshot to help us create an assessment and accountability system that is meaningful to students, families, community members, and educators. And as we work toward that moonshot goal, there have been several critical milestones that we have been working toward. Most recently, we shared about the process to develop our prototypes that outline the potential components in a future assessment system and a new accountability system. The current version that we have out is 4.0, and we wanted to be sure that we had the opportunity to review feedback from stakeholders from a variety of role groups so that we could make really informed decisions as we move closer to a final proposal. So as part of our plan in this study phase, so you'll see we went from the prototype phase into the study phase where we currently find ourselves. We developed 5 distinct work streams because we had a lot that we wanted to accomplish, so we knew we needed to divide and conquer. So if we could go to the next slide. The first of those work streams was actually within the Kentucky United We Learn Council itself. We've asked our members to not only provide feedback themselves, but also to find a role-alike peer that they could interview, or several, to ask for their feedback on the components that are currently in the 4.0 document, as well as some additional questions to help us learn specifically about how different role groups would be affected by some of the proposed changes. As part of our process in developing the prototype, we identified some study questions that we wanted to be able to answer as part of our data collection. So as we work through these slides, I've provided a sample question or two, although that is not exhaustive of all of the questions that the study phase hopes to address. But for our interviews that are being conducted by council members, we hope to learn more about how a potential vibrant learning indicator could prioritize and advance equity. So what would it look like if that were incorporated into a future system for the different role groups that we are interviewing? Next slide, please. Additionally, we knew it was really important to get a clear picture of where our districts are in their vibrant learning journeys. This is something that's been a priority for the department now for several years, and we know that many of our districts have been engaging in a variety of capacities around embedding deeper learning opportunities into the classroom for every student every day. However, some of our districts are farther along in the journey than others. And so our Division of Innovation is working to do a district preparedness inventory so that we can have a clearer picture of where everyone is in this process. Ultimately, this will be really helpful for us when we start to think about a final proposal that we would want to bring forward for consideration so that we could develop a reasonable implementation timeline. So representatives from the Division of Innovation will be reaching out to districts to help you complete this inventory that captures a variety of indicators about where you are in that process. So some of the questions that are guiding this particular work stream, what milestones would indicate a readiness to scale performance assessments, and to what extent are districts ready to implement a vibrant learning experience indicator? Next slide, please. So as you all know, we have, over the past 2 years, had 18 districts become part of the local laboratories of learning, and we have supported their investment in thinking about vibrant learning, thinking about working with their communities to identify local accountability models and work related to the United We Learn efforts. We wanted to hear from those districts, but we also wanted to be very intentional about identifying districts that were not part of the local laboratories of learning and being sure that we heard from them on this potential proposal so that we could have that diverse feedback. So in order to do that, we identified 18 additional districts to bring together with our 18 L3s for a series of focus groups. Those were facilitated by the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support, The districts that were represented in that sample group were also invited to bring forward other community members, educators from their districts, and other representatives to participate in those focus groups and provide feedback on the prototype. Some of the guiding questions for this particular work stream include what role should the state play to monitor quality without sacrificing local autonomy? And what should the state's role be in determining what can be submitted locally, as well as reviewing the quality of all of the local data points submitted? Next slide, please. Our fourth work stream was utilizing our outstanding partners that have worked alongside us throughout the time we've had the council in place. And we've asked those expert partners to draft a series of memos that focus on different topics so that we can be thinking about the technical considerations. We know that we have a lot of different elements that we're entertaining for these future proposals, but it's going to be important that we think about some of the considerations around reliability, validity, and some of the other implementation concerns that we need to be mindful of. The topics that the memos will cover include the development of a vibrant learning experience indicator, what it would look like to have a balanced state assessment system, more detailed information on performance-based assessment systems nationwide, as well as student growth models. So one of the guiding questions that we shared with our partners was what support will be necessary from the state to ensure information about VLE implementation, and VLE is our vibrant learning experiences, can be evaluated and reported in a manner that supports continuous improvement at the local level. Next slide. So the final stream was the feedback survey that we shared quite broadly over the last few weeks. We asked anyone who wanted to respond to do so. We created a series of resources to help people respond to the survey. We know that it is a very technical survey that had a lot of very detailed questions about potential components. So we had a series of videos and other support documents to help people answer the survey. Happy to report we had over 640 responses across the survey that was open to the general public, as well as a survey that was shared with school districts through the educational cooperatives. So that survey specifically spoke to the different components, whereas the prototype had the components in a particular configuration. The survey really broke out the different components that we were still considering so that we could get detailed feedback, because ultimately we want to be sure that the final proposal includes the elements that have the greatest support and that respond to the priorities that have been identified by the council and by our schools and districts. So some of the guiding questions for the feedback survey included what types of timely and actionable instructional information should be provided by a through-year model, and what kinds of resources and supports will districts need to provide greater access to vibrant learning experiences to their students. So as you can tell, we have a lot of data. If we look at the next slide, we have a little bit of a breakdown as of this past Friday to show the different role groups that we had represented in that survey. Again, over 640 responses that represent our educators, family members, community members, school administrators, and superintendents. We're pleased with that number, but I do want to emphasize that we have a few role groups that were not as responsive to the survey. We could potentially hypothesize that the survey was very technical in nature and maybe a little unapproachable for some of our students who maybe aren't familiar with some of the assessment and accountability elements. So the council members, when they meet, they are going to be identifying here at the end of the month some additional groups that we may want to be very intentional about following up with to get additional feedback before we move forward with a formal proposal. I would imagine that students would be one of those groups, but we also have some other groups that we want to be sure are represented before we move forward. Next slide, please. So speaking of where are we going next with all of this data? So the Kentucky United We Learn Council is scheduled to meet on the 21st and 22nd. The primary activity that the council members will engage in is a review of the data. So they will be looking at the data we collected in the survey through the focus groups, as well as reviewing the technical memos that we've had drafted, and talking about their own experience conducting interviews. All of that data will be reviewed so that we can then help guide them through what are the components that have the strongest support. Where are there potentially components that we're unsure of their support? If we have some things that are, it's unclear if we have a clear consensus or not, where do we need to get more information? Ultimately, the council will have a few more weeks to, as I said, go out and try to get additional feedback with the hopes that by the week of the 18th, we'll have a formal proposal that incorporates all of the feedback that we have gathered during this study phase for them to consider endorsing as a council. Should the council choose to endorse that formal proposal, it will then be brought to our local superintendents advisory council and our state board of education for consideration of approval. As you saw in the timeline, the next big phase of this work is the advocacy phase. So once we have a formal proposal that has been approved by LSAC and the board, then we can move forward with making sure that everyone is aware of the components and working together toward having the necessary state changes that would allow for that plan to be implemented. One thing that I do want to emphasize, as you saw in the timeline, we are hoping to have that proposal in front of the Kentucky General Assembly for the session in 2026. We know that there needs to be a budgetary appropriation for us to have a lot of this work take place. So it is an aspirational timeline, but we do think it is feasible. However, that does not mean that the new system will be implemented in 2026. So we do not anticipate that there would be a complete new system in place by the fall of 2026. However, we do want to work toward that timeline to have our recommended changes to the General Assembly by 2026 so that we can be intentional about what are the next steps in the timeline as we work toward that new assessment and accountability system that will be more meaningful for all of us. Commissioner, I believe that is the end of my presentation. Would you like me to pitch it to Brian, or are there any comments you would like to add?
No, Dr. Bruce, thank you so much. And again, I also want to take the opportunity to thank our superintendents that responded not only through possibly the superintendent portion, but to the district administrators, but also to our 36 districts that took some time. We've also got putting that data together, what it looks like. And how do we move forward? I will say that a theme that's coming out is the elevation of local accountability. Seems to be a prominent thought as we move forward. So again, the data that we're seeing is exciting. It's great to have so much input, but again, it's a heavy lift, and we know this for everyone. One of the other points that Dr. Brewer made at the end is, folks, we don't expect this to be rolling in the fall of 2026. We'll have this current accountability system probably with some tweaks maybe as we move forward, but this may require some type of step-by-step roll-in process, if you will, as we move forward too. So again, I believe that we can do better when it comes to accountability than what we're doing now. And I think that the data that we're getting back from you and from so many across our districts feel the same way also. So Dr. Brewer, thank you for that presentation. We really appreciate it. So at this time, Dr. Perry, if you wouldn't mind, let's talk about our Kentucky Board of Education goals and legislative priorities.
Absolutely, Commissioner. Thank you. So the Kentucky Board of Education met last week, and as part of that meeting, they did approve their updated goals and legislative priorities. So if we can go ahead and click again. So you'll notice that the goals are going to be pretty aligned with what Dr. Brewer was just talking about. You can go ahead and click on the next slide, please. These should not be surprising to anyone. I think they're very much in line with the work that's going on in the department currently. Next slide, please.
Dr. Perry, I'll chime in here if you don't mind just a little bit.
Sure.
It was intentional to do broad goals as we look forward at what adds into these goals. For example, with the vibrant learning, there's a lot of discussion within the new accountability system of how do we measure vibrant learning? What does that look like? There's a lot of questions from districts, and vibrant learning may look differently in different districts. So again, how do we make sure that students have certain opportunities, whether it be work-based learning, or whether it be advanced coursework, whether it be defenses of learning. We want to make sure kids have those type of opportunities across the Commonwealth. And again, also too, trying to address how does a small district do this versus a large district. So again, trying to help our districts push that relevancy within the classroom. And so many of you are doing work like this already. We're not looking to add on, but we want to emphasize the things that you are doing with vibrant learning, but also to making sure that we, as a Commonwealth, we give kids every single opportunity to demonstrate their learning as we move forward through vibrant learning experiences. And also too, when it comes to innovation, we're talking specifically about accountability. If you look at our second goal there, advancing education, innovation, and excellence, but it really centers around right now in that accountability system. But also too, that continuous improvement based on accountability measures. We're not running away from reading and mathematics. As a matter of fact, that serves as our foundation. We have to make sure that our kids are achieving at high levels, reading, math, science, and other areas. But we also want to, how can we do that in an innovative way to make sure students are getting so many opportunities? And again, there's so many districts across our state are doing a phenomenal job of this. We want to, highlight you, but also let you have that opportunity to share ideas across the Commonwealth. And of course, our third one, and one of our board members, I think it was Julie Powell, pointed out, the first two goals really can't be accomplished without the work of the third goal, and that's cultivating collaborative partnerships. The only way that we're going to be able to offer as a wide variety of vibrant learning is to make sure that we include our families, our policymakers, our community members, our students, to make sure we have those opportunities and those partnerships as we move forward. As a matter of fact, if you look at districts that already look at local accountability, they've done this through a collaborative partnership with the people within their district and probably even others outside their district. So those type of things are accomplished as long as goal 3 is accomplished with those partnerships. So again, the first one, vibrant learning for all, and more opportunities for vibrant learning. The second, innovation, especially when it comes to accountability, and also those collaborative partnerships. So those are the three main goals, and all the legislative priorities that you see are going to feed into these three goals at some point or another. So Dr. Fair, if you'll talk about those legislative goals, I really appreciate it.
Sure. Next slide, please. So obviously one of the top goals is supporting the work of the Cool Council. As Dr. Brewer mentioned, the goal is to have a draft proposal to start sharing, particularly with legislators, late spring, early summer. We'll continue to refine that and work on finding a bill sponsor that hopefully will put forward a bill for consideration in the 26th session. I'll also point out that unlike the past couple of years, these legislative priorities take a little bit of a longer view. As the commissioner was talking about earlier, some of these things are going to take maybe more than one session, so we're looking ahead a little bit. It also reflects the reality that the budgetary process has accelerated over the past couple of cycles. And so we really wanted to be able to start talking about some of the priorities that may require funding or have a funding request coming up, to start talking about those really starting early next year as the budget process really starts to get underway. So you'll see that reflected in these as well. So next slide, please. So several of the things that are on the priorities list are looking for funding for additional initiatives that are already underway, but that could use a little more funding to continue the good work that's happening in these areas. Obviously, a couple of these are priorities that we've talked about a lot: numeracy counts, Read to Succeed, universal preschool, HQIRs. So no real surprises here, but very happy that the board, again, is putting forward a little bit of a longer vision so we can really put these before the legislators now and hopefully get them considered as they start to think about the 2026 budget. Next slide, please. So we also have some relatively big financial asks that we're going to be making in the 26th session. One of those is KETS. It's going to need a substantial amount of funding to continue the services that are being provided to districts currently. We'd also like to see full-day kindergarten get codified. And obviously, school safety is always on our minds, and continue thinking about that. Next slide, please. There's also a few statutory items that we'd like to see get cleaned up to reflect both current process and just to remove outdated language. So the State Textbook Commission has really not met in some number of years and has been replaced by a more modern system that reflects HQIRs and the like. So we'd like to see that language get updated to reflect that new process. The other two are really just removing outdated language that's no longer necessary or needed. And that's the Council for Education Technology and that home computer program. So next slide, please. Oh, go back one. There we go. So if you remember back to the budget that was just passed and effective July 1, there are a number of initiatives for the education workforce, and we're very happy to see those make it into the budget and be funded. But we still want to keep pushing on this issue. So there's going to be a number of things that we're prioritizing over the next 2 years as we think about the educator workforce and the needs there. There's also a need to potentially amend some of the language that was passed in the 24 session as it relates to the kind of new mentoring program that the department was asked to look at and the potential impact on federal funding that has, because that was one of the few items that didn't have funding attached to it. So we'll be working on that as well. So the other big ask here is something that we've talked a little bit about over the past couple of years. And that's the potential for a statewide HR system, essentially. So something to replace KEPS with. You heard the commissioner talk about some of the limitations of KEPS. And so we've been looking at potential replacements for that. That could be a statewide application process. It would also help us have better data for legislators on vacancies. So again, just reiterating what the commissioner said, thank you all very much for getting those surveys filled out. I think it's going to be a huge help for us as we present next week to really be able to talk about what vacancies districts had at the beginning of the school year and what needs are there. So that'll certainly be a huge help, and we appreciate that. Moving forward, we really like to get away from needing to do surveys like that. So this sort of one system for everyone might be a way to do that. The other thing that's come up that came up at the meeting was the Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship. So for those who aren't familiar, the Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship provides up to 60 credit hours at any public institution for citizens that do not have an associate's degree. So it only applies to the top 5 demand sectors, though. So right now, teaching is not one of those. So we'd like to see education get added as a pathway potentially to allow Work Ready scholarships to be used for ed prep programs. So there's also the potential to kind of compound the good work that's happening with 2+2 programs. So some of the KCTCS colleges have agreements with regional universities to do 2 years at the KCTCS institution, then transfer and finish up. So by adding Work Ready Kentucky scholarships to the education pathways, it might strengthen those 2+2 programs. So next slide, please. So lots of work happening in the education workforce area. We have a couple of things on the facility side that we're going to look at doing. So you can see those there. This is kind of continuing the work that's been done in this area with 678. That language did not get codified, but did get extended for up to 3 years. It was in a couple of different places this last session. So 678 language will continue for the next at least 3 years. But we'll certainly be keeping that on folks' mind as we move forward through the biennium. So next slide, please. So there's also some potential tweaks to the student teaching bill from this last session. So you'll see the limitation there that we might want to try to get remedied. This would be a relatively small fix potentially. So certainly something that would be up for consideration in a short session. Next slide, please. So remember, we had the big CTE funding formula bill this past session. A lot of conversation around that. We did get it across the finish line. As you heard Dr. Hargis mention, we did, among other things, we got rid of that mid-year adjustment that we heard a lot about. So very happy with that. We still would like to see a little more done in this area. Particularly including the ATCs into the funding formula, but in doing so, having new funds added to hold local districts harmless when we bring in those ATCs to the formula. So it's a sizable ask, obviously at $15 million, but it would allow us to bring the ATCs into the funding formula to continue to streamline that process. And that number would allow us to hold harmless local districts. So we wouldn't be sharing the same size pie with the ATCs. It would increase the size of the pie when we bring them in. So next slide, please. Okay, so that's the legislative priorities that the board passed last session. Obviously, there will be things will continue to come up between now and the start of the 25 session, let alone the 26 session. But again, just very appreciative that we're taking a bit of a longer view, looking ahead to the next two sessions, and we'll continue the work in Frankfort. Commissioner?
Thank you, Dr. Perry, and I appreciate Dr. Perry spends a lot of time over into the Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Annex, and everywhere in between. So we really appreciate his work and make sure we make those connections with legislators. And also, too, thank you to Dr. Brewer and Dr. Hargis and also Ms. Ginn for their input on today's session. We really appreciate that. But I want to make one other point about and Dr. Perry mentioned this, we're looking at trying to do long range type of planning. For example, we feel like there may be an opportunity here to how do we look at funding district facilities differently? Whether it be, so many districts have passed the nickel. We think they should be rewarded, and they are getting rewarded by that matching funds. But also, too, for those districts that maybe can't pass the nickel tax, what do we do there? So at the end of the day, it may be time to reevaluate how we fund district facilities. It may be time to look at what's happening in other states and making sure that's a more equitable process, if you will. And one of the things that I've talked to a couple superintendents so far about this is how do we get the input from our superintendents, and maybe even utilizing some advisory councils to bring in some work with legislators and work with people here at KDE about how would we like to see district facilities funded differently. But that's a heavy lift, and that's something that we look at. It's going to take a much longer time than just one legislative session. This may be two, this may be three, this may be four legislative sessions where we get to the point where we feel comfortable. So we're going to be looking for input, just like we did with with our accountability system. We're trying our best to get as much input as possible as we move forward with ideas as we take it on to the legislature. And along those same type of lines, talking about getting input, one of the things that we've talked about here in our leadership team is making sure that, again, I think there's been a lot of good work from Robin Kinney and others that of having KDE as a customer service organization. We want to make sure that we're serving your needs. And we're working on a survey that'll be tagged on to everyone's email that'll basically have some short questions. We haven't finalized those questions yet, but basically were you satisfied with the service that you received from our organization? One of the other parts to that, and we're going to be talking to we've talked about the idea with the leadership team here at KDE. We're going to talk more specifically on how to divide up those questions. And one of the things that we're looking at too is making sure that if it's a specific office, we want to give praise to those offices that seem to be doing a very great job of serving your needs. Now, we're not specifically asking if you agree with us. What we're saying is, do you feel like we gave you the correct answer, the correct level of service? So again, we want to make sure that we have your input on that. And hopefully by November 1, you'll start seeing that customer service survey. And since I wouldn't see you in this arena again, I wanted to make sure that you knew that was coming. So I want to thank the leadership team here at KDE. They've been on board with this from day one. They've really looking forward to how can we better serve your needs. And hopefully we are already. And we have that opportunity to highlight some of the great work that's going on here at KDE in the avenue of customer service. So again, you'll see that coming up hopefully by November 1. And next slide, please. I believe that closes us for all of our presentations. Were there any questions in Teams? Ms. Ginn, was there any questions there?
We do not have any questions.
Okay, as always, folks, again, we appreciate your time. For those of you, again, that are getting ready for fall break, make sure you have a great one. There's some important dates that you're going to see coming up. Is on October 16th is the ACT data release. October 22nd is the next Educational Professional Standards Board meeting. Next Superintendent Webcast, November 14th. And also, too, the 2026 Teacher of the Year nominations open on December 2nd. And I highly recommend that you look across your districts, look for those exemplary people, those great individuals that make such a difference in your district. And we want to make sure we give them the proper opportunity to be a part of our work here, but also, too, that we want to spotlight them, not just the ones that are nominated, but we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to highlight all the great things that are going on in your classrooms. So again, we highly encourage that you take part of the 2026 Teacher of the Year nominations as they open up on December 2nd. So again, we appreciate your time. If you've got fall break coming up, get some relaxation in, spend some time with family, but also too, we want you to know that we appreciate your being all in.